Greetings, YouTube. Quite a while ago, Zhu Lung Yip asked me a question about multiclassing. And this is going to be a conversation that deals with D&D and Pathfinder, the OGL school of games. And he asked me, I think he's male, asked me what my thoughts are about multiclassing. Now, I've never been a huge fan of multiclassing under the OGL. First off, because you see a lot of really weird builds where people will be dipping in like 5 and 6 different classes. And dipping means taking a level, maybe 2 levels of a class to get a very specific ability, and then you move on. And I kind of have a hard time justifying how you explain that within the scope of a campaign. I mean, if somebody has 2 careers, that's unusual. More than that, and it becomes a little bit implausible. You start being like Buckaroo Banzai, scientist, surgeon, rock and roll star. And I never liked the way that kind of everything in the kitchen sink style fit into a game. I never bought it, really. Now, some of the Prestige classes, when it was originally published in 3rd edition, had a lot of interesting things going for them, because you have a very tight focus in a particular type of skill or ability. And at first I'm like, oh, that's kind of cool. But then I realized that it's taking you away from your core class ability. Now, there are certain classes I think that it makes absolutely no sense. For example, if you're a spellcaster, why do you want to lose access to your spells? That's what you do. And I never had a justification for that kind of thing. Unless your focus is going to give you continuations in spellcasting, but it has a particular slant. Say, for example, it has a focus in summoning, or a focus. There's one I thought would always make me smile, which is all about magic missile. So there was a prestige class about becoming incredibly good at magic missile, and I thought that was kind of cool. You become the Gatling gun of your party. But there are other core classes, I think, that fit that role better. For example, Warlock. There you go. You don't need that prestige class now. You don't need to multi-class. But if you're a fighter and you take something other than a fighter class, you're losing access to feat and you're losing access to your BAB. And that's really important if you're a fighter. And then along came Pathfinder. And Pathfinder said, if you stay in your core class, you get a bonus. Okay, I like that. That's giving you a bonus for staying in your core class. I prefer the carrot to the stick any day of the week. In addition, you have the I apologize, my train of thought just slipped away from me. The concept of penalizing people for multi-classing. I never liked that. Even though I'm not a big fan of it, I don't think giving people experience point penalties is the way to go. I don't believe in penalizing people for making those choices. If you're going to make those choices, even if I don't agree with them, I don't think you should punish people for it. But under Pathfinder, they came up with the idea of archetypes. And archetypes solved a lot of the multi-classing problem. Because it makes sense that that there's more than one fighter. This is not the only path of fighter. Fighter is an entire collection of different paths that all fall under the same rough category. You could be a spearman. You could be an archer. You could be as implausible as it is in the real world. You could be using two weapons and dual wielding. You could be a tank in the sense that you're really into defense and you're not, and your way of winning the battle is being so tough that your opponent cannot kill you. He just cannot wear you down. So that there are different ways of being a fighter, and by having the different archetypes, you can do these things at first level. Because that's another problem with multi-classing under the OGL, is that a lot of your different abilities are not going to be kicking in until later. With the archetype idea, you could start that at first level. You begin down that path towards that slightly, unusual choice about what kind of fighter you are, or what kind of a spellcaster, or what kind of a cleric. You get the point. Under Radiance, they had a slightly different version of it, where every class had 2 core abilities, and when you eventually bought into the whole multi-class thing, you got access to the 2 core abilities from another class. They did have limits on which classes you could take without penalty. They still had an XP penalty. So if you were a fighter, you could take these other certain limited number of classes, say 4 of them, so that you could multi-class into it. If you went outside that, it was more difficult. And again, not a big fan of the penalty concept, but I think within the world that they were presenting in Radiance, at least there was a certain amount of sense that was made in there. And then if you want, still, if you're Radiance, now you get access to 4 different core abilities, which is cool. And you now can buy core abilities, up to a certain amount of them, from the other class you've got, which gives you a lot of diversity. And then get ability if there was another ability at a later date where you could buy like abilities, specific abilities from a class. So you could have some multi-classing, but there was not going to be a character that had access to skills from 6 different classes. This absolutely nonsensical collection of abilities, which I think I was quite well thought out, was interesting. I kind of like the way it was executed. So obviously I'm saying that I prefer the way Pathfinder does it with archetypes, or Radiance does it with buying certain abilities from other classes, while still essentially being your core class. Under the OGL, I think as far as the standard D&D goes, I've never been a big fan of multi-classing. I prefer the idea that you have a path in life, because that's what most people have. They have a path in life. People have a career. I've been in manufacturing for 30 years. Okay? I didn't necessarily want to be in manufacturing for 30 years. It just happened to fall into where I fell into and where my interests were lying, and the jobs I was able to find. And that's how life works. You don't always end up being what you wanted. I didn't end up doing some of the things in life I would have liked to do if I'd had an unlimited amount of resources, which I didn't, and of course if I had been a little more psychologically and emotionally stable, which I wasn't. So I think that mechanically it doesn't make a lot of sense to me, because you're diluting your focus, and in some cases you are really attacking the core abilities of your class. Losing feat and BAB access as a fighter, to me, is crazy. Losing access to spellcasting if you're a spellcaster is nuts. I don't grasp that at all. But for some folks, they like the variety it offers. But I have a hard time justifying how you explain that in game terms. Not mechanically, but how do you justify a character that can do all these different things in one campaign? And maybe if they can pull it off, it would be interesting. Maybe Buckaroo Banzai, there can be one at a party. I don't know if you can have an entire party of Buckaroo Banzais. That might be a little wacky. But I'd like to hear what people have to say about multi-classing. Do you like it? Do you think it mechanically makes sense? Do you prefer how Pathfinder and Radiance deals with it? Or are you a person that loves classless systems and you ignore the entire problem, and you probably haven't listened to this video anyway?